Welcome to the Atkinson talks. We have gone back online this week just as our speaker lives over in the States. So sadly, my budget won't allow me to bring him over for the talk, but we've got the next best thing. We do have him live. So thank you for joining us today. I'm just going to do a very brief introduction. So the subject matter today, Dora Marsden. She began as a teacher, suffragette, author, and quite a sad end to her story without doing any spoilers. So today's speaker, Trevor Blake, he is a self-confessed Dora Marsden superfan, and he's going to talk to us again today about her life and some of the incredible stories attached to her. So thank you very much. Enjoy the talk, and I'll see you soon.
Hello, my name is Trevor Blake, and I'm a publisher and collector of Dora Marsden. I'd like to dedicate this talk to my favorite socialist who continues to be on the mend. I'm going to begin with a quote from Dora Marsden in her journal, The Egoist, for August 15th, 1914. Salvation is amusing to saviors, and we would not remonstrate against them, having no desire to spoil fun. And few things provide as much sport as a good cause. We merely endeavor to give the tip to the quarry, to the people who are in danger of being saved, and it is this: refuse to be dealt with. It is a matter we cannot enlarge upon here, but it is the gist of the gospel of power to those who would be free men. Thank you. And that was Dora Marsden from The Egoist. This presentation will be an overview of her life, and then some of her specific ideas, and then some of the research that's been done after her passing. And I'm glad to say it's going to include some images that have not been seen for over 100 years, and some of them have never been identified as her before, but I'm confident that I found some new images of Dora Marsden. Her life was a series of bursting of chains of confinement. Something would come up that she found intolerable. She would refuse to be dealt with, and at greatest cost would move on to something bigger, some more complex, larger vision of freedom than she had known in the past. Dora Marsden was born in the village of Marsden in 1882. Village is, of course, still there. They have a bed and breakfast in the house that she grew up in, and there are copies of some of her work in that house. But as soon as she was able, she burst from the confines of small town living and moved to the exotic city of Manchester, where at the age of 18, she was already a school teacher. To go from small town village life to being a school teacher, very rare in any time, even more so then. But in the year 1900, there she was teaching at Owens College. She taught the classics and some language classes. Her record there was not stellar, but neither was any opprobrium cast upon her. She was an adequate teacher, sometimes not as well prepared as she might, but this was a new life for her. And she went to the artist events in Manchester. She went to the intellectual meetings that she was hungering for. And while she was there, she met Christabel Pankhurst, the suffragette, daughter of Emmeline Pankhurst and sister of Sylvia Pankhurst. Suffragism, women's suffrage was exactly the fire that she was looking for when she moved to the big city. So, having left her village at great cost and become early school teacher with a paid job, better paid than anything she had ever had in the past or that her family had ever had. She gave it all up and became a full-time suffragette with the Women's Social and Political Union, the WSPU. She excelled. She was tireless, willing to get her hands dirty, willing to get in a scrap. She was diminutive, but always the standard bearer. She would be in the front of the parade. She would be the one with the flag. She would be the one marching into the line of police as they tried to disrupt another meeting. And by 1908, she was a leader in the WSPU. She was organizing. She was controlling the budget for certain activities. She was dispatching women around the country to do suffragette work. In 1909, she even was able to move from doing all that as a volunteer to doing it as a full-time paid suffragette from the WSPU. This was a new life, her third already at such a young age. She was someone who refused to be dealt with. She decided to disrupt a meeting by a younger politician, Winston Churchill, and this is how she did it. She hid in an urn in a theater overnight, throughout the day and overnight and into the next day, so that she could be in the theater while the security looked to make sure that no one was there. The meeting, when the morning came, she left, climbed up on the roof of the building and waited until the meeting started, waiting until the introduction was done, waiting until the first speakers were done. And then Winston Churchill was speaking, and he began to speak, and a voice from the heavens shouted out, "Yes, but what about women's suffrage?" And everyone looked around. They couldn't see where the voice was coming from. And she kept shouting it. She kept, "What about women's suffrage? Why aren't you talking about women's suffrage?" And finally, someone looked up, and there she was, peering through a skylight on the roof of this building, shouting about suffrage. Some minutes were required for a policeman to climb up on the building and crawl out on the roof where she was, grab her by the leg and start pulling her down. Well, she slipped. And if the policeman hadn't had a firm grip, she would have certainly fallen and been crushed in the fall. But she was brought down in that arrest, one of several arrests that happened to her. It slowed her down, not at all. As soon as she was out again, she was the standard bearer again. At another of her arrests, she was asked, "Will you adhere to the WSPU policy of only causing harm and violence to physical property, never to people?" And her answer was no, she would not. She would do anything for the cause of women's suffrage, including harm to anyone who opposed her and anyone who opposed the idea. She demanded to be tried as a prisoner of war, not as a criminal who had trespassed or interrupted a government function, but as a prisoner of war. And because she was unrepentant, she was found guilty, and she did some time in prison. There has been a question as to whether or not she went on a hunger strike or was force-fed, as some women were at that time, and as some women did at that time. The evidence is not firm. There were times where she said that happened, but only briefly, and other times no, and there's no external evidence that it happened. So it may have happened and it may not have happened. But what is known to have happened is that when she was in prison, she was told to put on the prison uniform, the the broad arrow uniform that shows that one is government property, no longer a human being. She refused, and fought and bit and scratched and threw a fit such that she served her time in the nude. And as if that weren't enough, she climbed up and broke out the windows of the jail cell with her fists. Well, these are some activities of a troublemaking soul that I hope I can now show you examples of. I'm going to switch to some images. This, and I hope you can confirm, please, that you're seeing this still image. This is a still image. Very good. This is a still image of one of Dora's arrests in 1909. You can see her stature compared to the child next to her. She was elfin. She was described as elfin, a perfectly formed miniature person at the time. Her eyes were described as violet. That's something I found only last year, that someone wrote that her eyes were violet. Well, here she is lecturing the policeman about her arrest. This is a known photograph. This is a photo that appeared in newspapers and has been seen since. However, this photo I only found last year. It was not labeled as Dora Marsden, but it's clearly in sequence with the previous image. This appeared in a newspaper in 1909. Here she is definitely lecturing the policeman about the cause of suffrage. What's more, I found this other photo of the same arrest. Here she is being led away. She's wearing the clothes she wore when she graduated as a college student in her early teens, because it loaned credence to the suffrage cause that educated women were in favor of it. That was the reason she and other women who had those degrees would wear their mortar and pestle, would wear their graduation clothes during the protest. And more recently, I have found this. Suffragette standard bearer, Miss Dora Marsden, the suffragette standard bearer, in the dock at Bow Street yesterday. She was ordered to find one sutri in £10 for 3 months, in default 1 month's imprisonment. Well, the caption says this is Dora Marsden, and it might be. However, to stand in the dock like that, she would have been standing on something, on a box or a platform or something. She would not have been taller than the policeman next to her. So it could be her standing on something, but also it looks like this woman is wearing glasses, and there's no evidence that she wore glasses. So is that Dora Marsden? Did she wear glasses? It is not known. But there you go. These are images that have not been seen since around 1909, and I'm honored to share them with you in this presentation. And now it's me again. I'd mentioned the broad arrows. That was something that the suffragettes used as a symbol. It was something that their oppressors put upon them, and so they put it upon themselves. They carried the standards that many of them carried, had the broad arrows on them. If you were a suffragette that got arrested and did jail time and prison time, you got a badge that was the 3 arrows. And to that end, I would like to show you something else that I found. I've been reading about Dora Marsden for a quarter century or so, and then more actively in the past 15 years or so. And then in the past 10 or 12 years, I've started going through every suffragette film I can find. And I have found film footage of Dora Marsden that was not known to exist. I watch just hours and hours of it, everything I can find. And then every few years I watch it all again because new things are scanned and put online. I watched this, I watched it a few times. I sent it to someone else who's seen as many photos and images of her as anyone has. And he said, yes, I think that's her too. So here is a clip from a film, and it was simply called Suffragette Miscellaneous Footage. There was no further information, but as I watched it, I saw Dora Marsden, and then shortly later, Mary Gawthorpe, whose story will also come out in this story momentarily. I've taken this clip and I've slowed it down, and here it is. And I'd like to show it again, this time with emphasis, to say, there she is. That is almost certainly Dora Marsden. And this is almost certainly Mary Gawthorpe here, adjusting her graduation cap. So there you go. For some suffragettes, for some members of the WSPU, militancy was strident speech and parades and shouting. And I have no judgment for or against them. For some, it was vandalism, breaking windows with hammers. Dora Marsden engaged in this. She and a friend rented a catapult from a fairground. And when a budget meeting for the government was being held in a cathedral, they launched projectiles with the catapult through the stained glass window into the meeting. And the projectiles were stones on which they had written bomb, B-O-M-B, to convey it was stones this time. This is what it's going to be next time. So vandalism was something that some suffragettes did, and I will not say anything for or against them. But for some suffragettes, it was a lot more than that. Militancy was militancy. It was acting in a military manner towards a military goal. And that, to that end, a quote from Dora Marsden, this from the October 1st, 1914 issue of The Egoist, her journal. If English women elected to, there exists nothing in themselves to prevent them from being as good a fighting force as the Japanese, for instance, and that would do to be getting along with. Readers in her time would have understood that she was referring to the defeat of the Russian Empire by the nation of Japan. Japan was less industrialized, was a less prosperous nation. It was an island nation versus a much larger Russian empire that was much more industrialized and much wealthier and fighting on their home turf. But Japan defeated them defeated them soundly. And this is what Dora was saying. Dora was saying that all these marches and talks and stuff were all well and good, but what was needed was war. Militancy was war. In the April 1st, 1914 issue of the Egos, she said, "There is much to be said in favor of a gala performance of civil war." Not marching and not yelling and not letters to the editor, but war. She was not alone in that. In 1912, a suffragette threw a phosphor bomb into a crowded theater. The phosphor bombs and sulfuric acid bombs were used in 1913 against multiple post offices and train cars. Also in 1913, the suffragettes began an arson campaign. They did not limit themselves to damage against property. They set buildings on fire with men and women in those buildings, men and women who also generally did not have a right to vote. And in fact, in one of their bombs at a dockyard, 2 men died. The suffragettes killed. The acid attacks did maim people, burned them with acid. 1914, they added pipe bombs to the arson campaign. All of this is very in keeping with the motto of the WSPU, deeds, not words. Now, was it successful, or was it a hindrance to women's suffrage? No other nation in the world that has women's suffrage had this similar campaign. Some granted women's suffrage before, and some granted women's suffrage after. And so I leave it to you to consider whether it was helpful or not, but it happened. Dora was ready for civil war, and she was advocating it. Did she engage in the bombings and the arson? There is no direct evidence that she did. But did she get in scraps? Did she get in fights? Did she fight off police and prison guards much larger than herself? Yes, she did. Well, all of this was a vexation to the WSPU. They had 2 ideals in mind. They wanted their goal, but they only wanted it by certain means. There's very little evidence that these campaigns were directed from the top down, that Emmeline Pankhurst said, okay, you go set that house on fire and you detonate that pipe bomb. There's some evidence, but not a lot, in part because their papers were seized many times by the police and by the government and did not survive. They were destroyed over the years. So we only have some evidence that it came from the top. Otherwise, it was just kind of known and rewarded, because these women who were committing these acts, when they were caught and convicted and went to prison, they were rewarded by the WSPU. Well, here's Dora being strident and also publicly strident. Some of these other women were being privately strident and getting rewards. She was publicly strident, saying, no, if we're going to have deeds, not words, we need to have the deeds. And what do you do with someone who is that much of a firebrand, who refuses that much to be dealt with? Well, you give them a promotion. And that's the sure way to isolate anybody. She was promoted to a desk job in Southport. She was sent to Southport from London. She had been born in Marsden, moved to Manchester, then London, and now she was sent to Southport to a desk job to raise up the suffrage cause there, not in London, not cause further trouble for the headquarters of the WSPU. And she did what she could. She did organize. She wanted to try some new things that the Home Office had not approved before. Namely, she wanted to have a festival. She wanted to have a cultural event that had the WSPU as the sponsor, but had different events going on, not all so tied into suffrage. She was going to have booths of different philosophies and different organizations. She was going to have a fortune-telling booth. She was going to have games of chance and musicians and food. And her idea was people would come to this and enjoy the experience. And well, who put this on? The WSPU did. And that was going to be the promotion for it. So she was perhaps trying to simmer down. But the Home Office noticed how much of a budget she was asking for this event. They granted it. They said, "Are you sure?" "Oh, yes, quite sure. I need this much money." She was granted the money and then quickly asked for more, much more, and asked for more on a regular basis. So much so that she was asked for the receipts. Could she submit the paperwork for her expenditures? Well, this was a great affront to Dora Marsden. She wrote back, "How dare you question my dedication to the cause? I have never done anything but what you say. I am utterly innocent of any wrongdoing. I find this movement confining." And the death knell rang on Dora's time in the WSPU. As to who was ringing the bell, the records are in conflict. She did not, and perhaps could not, provide the receipts for her expenditures. The WSPU wrote to her that she was relieved of her duties. She wrote to them that she was leaving the organization. Those letters crossed in the mail. They were written close to one another, and I can't say who read the other letter first. So she either quit or was fired. And there she was in Southport, her cause gone, her teaching job long gone, and her village life longer gone even than that. In 1911, Dora Marsden renounced women's suffrage and returned to England. Women's suffrage is so universal now in the West, in many countries all over the world. There's almost no exception to it now. The idea of renouncing women's suffrage, especially for someone who was the vanguard for it, is foreign. But she gave 4 reasons as to why she did, which will be reviewed later. So she had to reinvent herself this time. She was not leaving a village and entering Manchester. She was not in Manchester entering teaching. She was not leaving teaching and entering suffrage. She was leaving suffrage, and there was nothing on the other side except herself and her resources and her friends and the other women who wanted a more militant sort of militancy. And she elected to turn to publishing, to writing and publishing, as a vehicle for bringing together these ideas and these women and some men who felt that feminism and suffrage had betrayed them, who felt that it had become a cause in itself rather than an end that they hoped to achieve. And this new idea that was not suffrage and not feminism, she called the free woman. The free woman was an individual pursuit of freedom, in her case, as a free woman. In 1911, she founded a magazine called The Free Woman. The Free Woman is in contrast to the bondwoman, which is what she called the suffragettes and the feminists, in that the bondswomen sought rights, or rights is something granted by others, and even then provisionally. If your right is granted, it can be taken away. Whereas a free woman doesn't seek or grant rights at all, but pursues abilities. What strengths and resources does the free woman have? Not what rights could they have. The free woman considers rights to be imaginary in the way that we might now laugh at the idea of a divine right of kings, but still honor human rights. Well, what about the idea of laughing at all rights? All rights are imaginary. No right will save you if someone is attacking you, or if you are hungry, no right will make food appear. It's not that your ability will make food appear, but it may make food appear, whereas a right, like a wish or a prayer, simply won't. As the editor of the Free Woman and the journals after the Free Woman, Dora Marsden and her co-editor, Mary Gawthorpe, who appeared in the film earlier, were the first to publish works by James Joyce, Ezra Pound, H.D., and Storm Jameson and T.S. Eliot. And that is why, for an obscure and not especially popular magazine at the time, it's very difficult to collect or buy her journals, because I'm in competition with only a few Dora Marsden collectors, but I'm in competition with every James Joyce collector. And hats off to them. They and the institution behind them have more than I do, but I've got some, and I'd like to show you some. This is this is the Free Woman. This is an issue of the Free Woman, as published and edited by Dora Marsden, Mary Gawthorpe. I don't have many issues of it, but I have every one that I've ever had a chance to get. It had art, literature, culture, politics, the idea of this new idea of the free woman, which in all her time editing and writing, she never quite got around to defining what a free woman is. What I've just said about the free woman, I say because she said, in contrast, the bondswoman will do this, this, and this. So you can conclude that the free woman will do not those things. But that's just my conclusion. Perhaps I'm wrong. We'll never know, because she never said a free woman is such and so. Another way she refused to be dealt with. Here is a cabinet card of Mary Gawthorpe. Mary was the co-editor of the Free Woman. And this cabinet card is something that the WSPU put out with her image on it. On the reverse, it is a postcard. If there is a cabinet card of Dora Marsden, I've never seen it or seen evidence of it, but maybe there is. And if there isn't, then someone should make one. And maybe that'll be you, or maybe it'll be me. But there's her cabinet card. Well, Dora refused to be dealt with, so much so, as an ongoing thing, that it got her in trouble with her printer. There's the publisher of a journal, and then there's the printer of the journal. When a new issue of the Free Woman would go to press, she would show up at the print shop and demand changes while it was being printed. And this became such a vexation to the printer that he refused to work with her anymore. And at the time, the law was such that the printer, not the publisher, owned the name of what was printed. And so she could no longer print the Free Woman, her journal. And so she printed the New Free Woman as a way of restarting the magazine under a slightly new name. There was only a year's worth of the New Free Woman because she would not relent. She kept asking for these last-minute changes throughout the printing process. And on top of that, not paying her contributors, not paying for printing, not paying for distribution. And so the New Free Woman was also a journal that ended, but last came the Egoist. In the Egoist version of this journal, Dora was promoted to lead writer, no longer editor, no longer publisher. Now she was the lead writer. And this suited her. She was tired of movements. She was tired of leading, tired of followers. She wanted to retreat just into writing and philosophy specifically. And she was given an exceptionally free hand. She had the cover story or the cover article, issue after issue of the Egoist. And a great deal of her writing comes from there. My interest in Dora Marsden is as an egoist. Her whole life is fascinating and tragic and worth knowing about. But this is the door that I entered with studying her. And so this is what I know the most about and have published the most about. The editing of the Egoist was passed to Harriet Weaver Shaw. And Shaw kept the Egoist in publication to finish out some series that Dora wrote, but also expanded what the press did to being just a general press, the Egoist press. They published books, and I have some of the books which were published by the Egoist press. Here is one. This is a book of poetry that was published by the Egoist press. There are quite I'd say a dozen, 2 dozen books from the Egoist press. They were well enough made. They weren't especially revered and collected, so most of them are worn by time, as we all become. But there it is. It's a nice little book from the Egoist press. The Egoist press also eventually published books by Dora Marsden. And I would like to show you those books now. This is The Mysteries of Christianity by Dora Marsden from the Egoist Press. And as you can see, it's a former library book. Most of the copies that endure are former library books. This one from the Manchester Library. One hopes that it was lawfully deacquisitioned back in the 90s and that I don't have a hot book. Don't tell, please. This was not her first book. This was her second book. Her first book was The Definition of the Godhead. The glare, let's see if I can remove some of the glare of the dust jacket there. That's what it looks like without the jacket. And once again, she couldn't leave it alone. This is the errata of corrections and changes she insisted on after the book was published. The Definition of the Godhead, the jacket here reads in part, "This work is the first volume of a philosophy which claims to effect the intellectual rehabilitation of the first principles of physics, i.e., space and time." The dedication of the book is to the great name hidden among us for so long of her, heaven, the mighty mother of all. And this is a reference to the Bible verse Galatians 4:26. "The Jerusalem that is above is the free woman. She is the mother of us all." This may be where she got the name free woman. And she may have got this verse from The Ego and His Own by Max Stirner, which influenced her to call her journal The Egoist. When the Egoist closed in 1911, Dora and her mother, Hannah, and their cat, Sarah, her cat, Sarah, moved to Seldom Seen. And it is there in Seldom Seen that she began to write not essays that would be collected, but books. And this was The Definition of the Godhead was one of those books. And The Mysteries of Christianity was one of those books. Here is another copy of The Definition of the Godhead. And this copy has an inscription in it. And this inscription is from Dora Marsden to Storm Jameson, fellow former suffragette, fellow contributor to The Free Woman, The New Free Woman, and The Egoist. This is Storm Jameson's copy of Dora's book. Her books did not do well. Regarding The Definition of the Godhead, it was stocked in a bookstore owned by Grace Jardine, again, a fellow suffragette alumni. And Grace Jardine tried as she could to help her friend sell her book. It was in a bookstore, and the record that was kept showed that 4 copies were sold, one of whom was sold to Rona Robison, a friend of Dora's, the other 3 unknown, and in all, as a whole, 6 copies. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 copies of the book were sold, and no more. For the other of her books from 1930, The Mysteries of Christianity, 500 were printed. 100 of those printed copies were bound as books, and no copies sold. Not one. No copies sold anywhere. And the copies that exist are generally copies that had been mailed to libraries or reviewers. And that's why most of the copies you'll see in the secondhand market have library markings, because that's all there are. She wrote her books in isolation. She lived with herself, her ideas, her mother, and her cat in Seldom Seen, which is a mining town, or was a mining town, in some beautiful, beautiful cottages, which are still with us and are in fact now a lovely bed and breakfast. But at the time, Dora would go weeks and months speaking to no one, not her mother, not her cat. And then every once in a while, someone would bring the mail, or someone would bring provisions, or one of her old friends from suffrage days would come and visit. She came out with her books, which she had great hope in. She was trying to unify all of philosophy and science into a new theory of time and space that transcended language to allow the direct perception of reality outside of language, outside of the individual, outside of culture and any limitations, much less any political limitations, even physical limitations. Her philosophy had taken her to religious, cosmic realms. Her friends were concerned with her isolation and concerned with her ideas that did not make sense to them. It didn't make sense. And I've read her books, and they don't make sense to me. Dr. Les Garner wrote the biography of Dora Marsden, which is called A Brave and Beautiful Spirit. And when he was doing research on the book, he spoke with men and women who had known her. And a lot of it went into the book, and some of it did not go into the book. In the 1990 edition of his book, he wrote that Dora had an accident in which she broke her pelvis and her leg. And that was the event that led to the next phase of her life. Well, I spent 8 years looking for Les and found him, and we have a good exchange back and forth. He told me that he had been told more information about that event, that she did not have an accident, that she had thrown herself down some stairs in an attempt at suicide. And that was why she was confined, because after her accident, Dora was confined in the year 1935. She went to Crichton Royal Hospital in Dumfries, where she lived the rest of her life. In Dumfries, she continued writing, and she continued rereading her own books. Her family came to visit her mother, as long as she lived, and her niece and nephew, but not her brother and sisters, not her father, who had moved to the United States when she was a child, not her US family, only some of her family, only her niece and nephew, and only Harriet Shaw Weaver, kept in regular contact. She refused to be dealt with, so much so that all of her friends could no longer stand her. Those friends that she had long correspondences with had destroyed mail to and from her. There are not many letters that survive in her hand because she was burning the bridges so readily that her letters were destroyed. However, not all of her letters were destroyed. Here is a letter from Dora Marsden, and she circled it to make sure you knew, as well as signed it. on the stationery of when she was the publisher of The Egoist. One of the very few letters that has survived, and one of the very few that's not in institutional collection. And all praise to institutional collections. They do terrifically important work, but this one is not in their hands, but my own. So Dora was in great isolation in Dumfries, but she was not put upon. She seemed to have taken to the cloistered life quite well. She could read her own books and congratulate herself. She could write. She wrote perhaps 5 to 7 other books that during that time in Dumfries. And she had her needs taken care of. She was not under lockdown. More than once, and I believe more than twice, she requested a leave, and she was granted it. She was not chaperoned. She was not monitored. She just left at a scheduled time, pardon me, and returned at a scheduled time under her own power. So her life at Dumfries was positive. It was not as desperate as some may have had at the time. It suited her, and I'm glad it happened. But it wasn't the end of her being a published writer. Harriet Shaw Weaver, the one friend who kept in touch, did get one more book out. And that book is The Philosophy of Time. The cover is faded in time, but there's still a little bit of yellow to it. And Dr. Garner spoke with Harriet Shaw Weaver and was told that the cover is yellow to symbolize the sun and daytime, with black text to symbolize nighttime. The Philosophy of Time is it's a brief book. It came out in 1955 and is the last published book from Dora Marsden. It was pulled from a larger text on the philosophy of time that Weaver had. She had this larger text and she used it to give a lecture. A few years ago, I tried to find that lecture and I learned that it had been saved. The notes from that lecture had been saved. And I found the library where they were. That library had loaned it to a second library, found the second library. They had loaned it to a third library, and the third library had lost it. And so, like the larger work that it was from, the lecture notes are lost. The larger work is lost. The 5 to 7 other books that she wrote are lost. They're just gone. There's no record of them. The letters she wrote where she might have quoted from them, largely destroyed. But she didn't need an audience. She just needed to write. She didn't need us. We needed her more than she needed us. And in 1960, 5 years after The Philosophy of Time came out, Dora left the final confinement. She passed on in the year 1960. She had spent 35 years in the hospital, knitting and writing and reading, visiting with her few friends and family that came. When Les went to visit her remains in the early 1980s, there was a simple stone marker. And to his surprise, the stonemason who made that marker had signed it on the side. And it said Garner, his last name. Well, that stone is also gone. Dora Marsden is in an unmarked grave now. I am one of a few people getting together the resources and hopefully the permission to make a new stone, a new memorial for Dora Marsden, who so strongly refused to be dealt with. Thank you. And now, if I may, 4 arguments from Dora Marsden against suffrage. Dora Marsden, and this is what Dora said. Dora said, Dora quoted Christabel Pankhurst, the woman who brought her to suffrage, in Christabel's book, The Great Scourge and How to End It. Christabel wrote, "The sexual diseases are the great cause of physical, mental, and moral degeneracy and of race suicide. As they are very widespread, the problem is one of appalling magnitude. To discuss an evil, then run away from it without suggesting how it may be cured is not the way of the suffragettes. And the following pages will be found a proposed cure for the great evil in question. That cure, briefly stated, is votes for women and chastity for men." So Christabel advocated votes for women as a means of enforcing chastity for men. Dora said that was ridiculous. She said it would not succeed and was not even a worthy goal. One may ask, if votes for women has caused chastity for men and what the connection might be, you'll have to take that up with Dora Marsden. Her second argument was that the WSPU was playing politics. They said they were for suffrage, but it was just words, not deeds, just words. She said the WSPU was just a political party playing politics like any other political party. And they were a political party. They ran candidates. They had memberships. They required exclusive membership. If you were in the WSPU, you could not be in labor. You could not be a progressive. You could not be anything else. You had to just be in their political party, as many political parties will also require. When the WSPU began, they had a constitution and they allowed voting within their membership. Members would vote on issues and vote for representation within their party. Well, at one point, Emmeline Pankhurst and Christabel Pankhurst had a closed meeting that was unscheduled, and they alone documented that meeting. And in that meeting, they decided that the Constitution was not their own Constitution was nullified and there would no longer be votes, and that they were the leaders for life. They took away the right to vote of the Organization for Votes for Women. Emmeline Pankhurst wrote in her autobiography, "If at any time a member or a group of members loses faith in our policy, if anyone begins to suggest that some other policy ought to be substituted, or if she tries to confuse the issue by adding to our policies, she ceases at once to be a member. Autocratic, quite so. But you may object. A suffrage organization ought to be democratic. Well, the members of the WSPU do not agree with you." Some members of the WSPU did not agree with her and this policy, and they made their objections known to the Pankhursts, the leaders. She expelled them right away. That was just it. And Emmeline made the decision, and she dispatched her daughter Christabel to deliver the message to one in particular, saying, "You have a democratic constitution for your federation. We do not want that. Votes for women, but no votes for women." The WSPU was also in favor, they were in favor of equal suffrage. Men had the right to vote. Women, they said women should have the right to vote, but not all men had the right to vote. And the WSPU did not want anything more or less than that. In the 1909 August 27th issue of Votes for Women, they wrote, the Women's Suffrage and Political Union are not asking for a vote for every woman, but simply that sex shall cease to be a disqualification for the franchise. At present, men who pay rate and taxes, who are owners, occupiers, lodgers, or who have the service or university franchise, possess the parliamentary vote. The WSPU claim that women who fulfill the same conditions shall also enjoy the franchise. So men with university education who are also property owners could vote at the time, and they wanted that for women, but for no other woman. No university degree, not a property owner, no vote. That's what they wanted. Dora noticed that votes for women was votes for some women, and eventually votes for Emmeline and Christabel Pankhurst, votes for 2 women. Well, history is written by the winners. Woe to the vanquished, might makes right. The Pankhurst wanted votes for some women. They have numerous statues in their honor, as well they should. They changed society. Dora wanted freedom for all individuals, and she lies in an unmarked grave. The WSPU held that suffrage would end war. No, it did not. It just didn't. I wish it had, but it did not. And instead, the WSPU would support war. They issued a circular letter in 1914. We believe that under the joint rule of enfranchised women and men, the nations of the world will, owing to women's influence and authority, find a way of reconciling the claims of peace and honor and of regulating international relations without bloodshed. I'm for that. But in that same circular letter from 1914, they announced that they were suspending all suffrage activities for the duration of the war. In 1915, they changed the subtitle of the newspaper Votes to Women to The War Paper for Women. Now, there is a possible reason why that change happened. And that is, around that time, King George V directed the Minister of Munitions, Lloyd George, to meet privately with Emmeline Pankhurst. And he told her that if she suspended all suffrage activities, she would receive £4,000 a year for life, no strings attached. She issued that letter saying suffrage activities were suspended, and she never found the time to come back to it. She never advocated for suffrage again. And there was a gap between the end of World War I and women's suffrage in the UK. She never spoke of it again. She never had a reunion with former comrades. Sylvia Pankhurst, the daughter of Emmeline and the sister of Christabel, opposed the war. But she had already been expelled from the WSPU on the orders of her mother, which were delivered by her sister, because Sylvia had advocated votes within the organization, and for that she was expelled. Now, the last reason, of 4 reasons that Dora gave for opposing suffrage, was that it was not enough. The vote is something granted by the powers that be on occasion for issues that they decide. Dora wanted complete freedom for the individual. Complete freedom. And that freedom comes from abilities of the individual, not from rights. And if a group of individuals come together and work together for that duration, then good for them. And in fact, something that she did not organize, but was organized around her, were the free women's circles. When the free women came out, a group spontaneously came together, the free women's circles, men and women meeting, talking about individualism, It's the first case of that happening in the world. It doesn't make sense for a group to talk about individualism, but here I am and here you are, and there they were, the first group in the world to talk about individualism. Dora came to it through her own cantankerous nature. She also was familiar with Nietzsche. She was familiar with Machiavelli. She was familiar with Stirner, Max Stirner, author of The Ego and His Own. And she wrote of Stirner, creative genius folded its wings when Stirner laid down his pen. Well, the very, very few other people interested in egoism around the world wrote to her, "We're so glad to see your work. We haven't seen anything like this. This is fantastic. You're the egoist that we've been waiting for. This is great." And she burned those bridges one by one with Benjamin Tucker, Clarence Swartz, and Stephen Byington, all egoists in the US. They got the short end of the stick as soon as she could get it in hand. Right. But was Dora an egoist? I will leave her with the last word on that. She was asked, is the journal called The Egoist, is it an egoist publication? She wrote back, "Stirnerian is not the adjective fittingly applied to the egoism of the egoist. What the appropriate term would be, we can omit to state." Ever frustrating. She refused to be dealt with to the end and beyond. And at the end, Rebecca West, another friend of hers who she had cast away, wrote in the journal Time and Tide in 1926, "It may be that the wisdom she has obtained is not communicable, but I'm sure to some far peak of wisdom she must have attained, and I cannot think it is not good for the race when some of its component atoms reach projection, even if they cannot transmit it to their fellows." Thank you. That is all.
Oh, thank you, Trevor. That was absolutely incredible. My God, what a woman. And so true to herself all the way through, which makes it really interesting.
Yes, yes, she was true to herself, if no one else.
Indeed. And also, thank you for bringing all that in about the suffragette movement in general, because it's kind of, as you said, it's like history is written by the winners. So the version of events that gets told is it's kind of, they were held up as the pinnacle of, they were fighting for women's rights, but clearly through their own agenda. So it's absolutely fascinating to get that side of the story as well. So thank you very much for that.
Yes.
We did have a question come through. Rachel's going to find it now. If you have a look in the chat section, it should have come up.
Let's see, the chat section. I'll read the question that I'm seeing here.
Okay.
From Kevin. Hi, Kevin.
Yes.
You mentioned Max Stirner in passing to her journal and the publisher Egoist. Was there evidence that she had read Stirner, at least in translation? Did she ever interact with others who were influenced by Stirner? Yes, she did read Stirner. The evidence of that is she quoted him. She cited having read it. She named her journal The Free Woman, I think even before she spoke of Stirner, because she read it in Stirner. I think she read Stirner in German. She knew many languages. I think she read it in the original German. She did interact with other egoists, all negatively. She was prickly to them as to every socialist, every feminist, every police officer, every judge, every family member, everyone. She was a bundle of needles that you could not pick up. Another part of the question, Dora's arc of defiance seems to have been logarithmic. Can you go over in succession the increasing targets of her attention? Oh, yes. Mm-hmm. First, small town living in the village of Marsden, to exciting Manchester as a school teacher, to being in London, suffragette, fist fights every day, to philosopher, to even space and time and language being too confining for her. As an example of what she was trying to achieve with language, she went to a school for the deaf. And through interpreters and with her own attempted direct communication with writing back and forth, she wanted to speak with deaf children because the main model for language at the time was language is sound, sound and speech. And these were children who had never heard. So how did they get language? Do they have language? And that is a linguistic inquiry in the early 1900s that didn't happen again in linguistics for almost 75 years, when people said, wait, sign language is a language. It's not broken English. It is a language in itself. Well, she was there much, much earlier asking the same questions. Do deaf children have language, and how do they acquire language? But for her, it was, how can I get outside of language? Language is something taught to me from the outside. It's not, one might say, from my heart, not from my soul, not from the real ego, the real me. In the end, even language was a bind to her that she was trying to overcome. Well, there you go. I have a few other, if there's time, I'm not sure how we are on time, but I have some other show and tell if there's time for that.
We've probably got a few minutes, and then we're probably going to get very rudely interrupted with another meeting coming in.
And
But
I
yeah,
will skip right to the best.
Go on then.
This is Les Garner's book in its first edition, A Brave and Beautiful Spirit. This is the book where I found out the most, the first. It was published from an academic press, very hard to find. And it's got this lovely photo of Dora being hauled away again. Here's this amazing photo on the back. This photo has been lost. This is something that her niece gave to Les, and it's almost certainly been destroyed because the stigma of mental health was so bad that her niece destroyed most of her things. Well, after the years I spent finding Les and talking with Les, he gave me permission to make a new edition. And here is my edition of The Brave and Beautiful Spirit, which I wrote a new introduction to. I wrote a new index for it, and Les very kindly revisited it, made a few changes, made some additions to the content of it. And we'll have one last, and that's it. That's the show and tell. Thank you all.
Oh, Trevor, thank you. It has been truly fascinating to listen to you. Hopefully at some point in the future you may be over here and we'll get you in to actually do the talk in person. That'd be really
guaranteed. Guaranteed. And I would like to say that Dr. Garner has appeared in the chat. Hello, Les. I will respond more later, and I'm sure he will.
So, Trevor, seriously, it has been fascinating. So thank you so much for your time. And what is the time difference over there?
It is currently 10:15 in the morning.
Okay, so we're nearly at tea time over here. So.
Yeah. So, good morning.
Yes, so thank you for your time. Thank you for a fascinating talk. And yeah, we'll definitely have to catch up later. So
thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. If anyone would like to ask more, go to unionofelgoists.com and I'll see you there.
Take care. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.